Hey internets, today is going to be the last of my videos that do an honest look over various platforms that I will be doing before the upcoming US election on November 5th, so roughly a week from now. And this one's going to be on Kamala Harris's political platform, which is the last of these videos for the simple reason that up until, well, just a few months ago, Kamala didn't really even have a platform. That's right, in case anybody forgot, if you went to her website during that time, you didn't actually see any kind of political platform whatsoever. There was no issues tab. Her platform for quite a while was pretty much just I'm not Donald Trump. And her campaign up to that point was really just running on good vibes, I guess. And because of this, I kind of need to immediately deduct some points from her because that was extremely dishonest. Not having a platform until the very last minute allowed the DNC to trick people into thinking that her platform would just be whatever the people wanted. It was a psychological trick to avoid criticism. Since, hey, you can't have your policy platform criticized if you don't have a policy platform. It's kind of half parts ingenious, half parts insane, and just kind of further proves the myth of the rational voter. But anyways, instead the Harris team just posted the platform last minute so they could say it existed while simultaneously giving people very little time to go through it and check it for anything incorrect, unfeasible, or just completely and utterly ridiculous. And a lot of the media, especially networks like MSNBC and CNN that work favorably with the DNC, were happy to ignore this deceptive tactic and instead just harp on about Project 2025 all day, which was the subject of my previous video. Due to the extreme mainstream media bias, I am again partnering with Ground News. Mass media narratives these days rarely come without bias, with Project 2025 being just one of the endless examples. And Ground News helps you see through this bias by going through thousands of news articles and organizing them for you in ways that give context on where their political bias lies. For example, let's look up Project 2025 using their search feature. There's been a lot of heat about this topic, and Ground News has compiled hundreds of articles with a convenient graphic showing the political leaning of where the articles are coming from. Using this, we can easily see at a single glance that most of the Project 2025 hype is actually coming from mostly just the center left, telling you that the topic itself is likely loaded with a hint of partisan bias before taking it too seriously. You can also see simplified summaries for each article generated to save you even more time. Another feature related to this is Blind Spot. It lets you see which stories are being over or underreported by the left or right. This is an extremely useful feature due to the fact that reporting bias and agenda setting is one of the most common forms of mass media manipulation, and Ground News provides this extremely easy way to see through it and know which stories are being unreasonably amplified or ignored. Like this one right here. Confidence in the media falls to new low ahead of presidential election, disproportionately ignored by left-leaning outlets. Gee, I wonder why that could be. Ground News also has a lot of good features like these bias distribution charts for every topic, giving a quick visual representation of news outlets and their political leanings. Lastly, Ground News is independent and subscriber funded, so to get the same features I have, you can go to ground.news/mentiswave or scan my QR code to get 40% off the Vantage plan, which grants you unlimited access. Anyways, let's now get started from the top. Her plan for the economy. Now, I'm actually really glad that Harris is putting this at the top of her issues page, because it allows us to go through some very basic misconceptions about her policy right from the start. Because her economic policy is not only not good, it's just kind of completely incoherent. I'll just go into it and you'll see what I mean. For example, on cutting taxes for middle-class families. Her idea here is pretty much just providing tax credits paid for by taxing the rich. And that's an issue because tax credits need to come with overall tax cuts for them to actually count as a tax cut. If tax credits come bundled with overall tax increases, then it's really no different from just more welfare programs. They're just being reworded as tax credits. And this is one of the things I mean by just a completely incoherent platform. She's claiming that she's cutting taxes, but if you understand what these things are and what these proposals do, she's really not cutting taxes. So it's very bizarre and very deceptive. If one sector of the economy is simply being taxed more to pay for someone else's tax credit, it's welfare. It's just being done in a way that's indirect. And another thing I must point out here is that a true tax cut must come with a real reduction in government spending. Otherwise, that just means the state is using the Fed to print more money for the expenditures, which means everyone will end up paying more taxes indirectly in the form of inflation anyways, which is easily one of the worst forms of taxation because it generally hits the poor the most, while benefiting corporations that have ties to the Fed the most. And spoiler alert, Harris's platform comes with overall increases to funding various government programs, so her claims that she is somehow lowering taxes here are really just pure gaslighting. And we can see this in her claim, no one earning less than $400,000 a year will pay more in taxes. That is incorrect. Tax incidence makes it so you can't actually tax a specific group of people while guaranteeing another will not bear the tax burden through indirect or in some cases second order or third order consequences. And since the Harris administration would not be turning off the Fed money printer go burr machine, this means that people making less than $400K a year would absolutely still be paying more taxes. So it's this idea that we're going to give you this credit, which is nice, but we're still going to have you pay for it. For anyone new to the channel, I did a video on this on tax the rich, and I'll link it at the end, because it's very important to understand that you can't actually just fund things by taxing the rich. When you do that, you're trying to tax directly the group that has the greatest level of economic mobility. They just pass the taxes along somewhere else in the economy. It doesn't work. And the thing is, Kamala Harris has access to plenty of economists who will explain to her why it doesn't work. The DNC knows that this doesn't work. They have access to plenty of information and plenty of proof that explains to them why this doesn't work. They know that they can't actually pay for things by just simply taxing the rich. And that's why I'm really glad that Kamala Harris started out with this just massive derp bomb, because we just kind of immediately know that she's lying to us. And to make things even worse, she wants to pay for it further with a capital gains tax of 28%. This is a terrible idea. Capital gains taxes disincentivize investment, which reduces economic growth, which is the one thing that tends to help the poor the most. And she just kind of wants to set that on fire. I mean, I kind of suspected that this would be bad considering some of the takes she's had on the economy, such as just the utter financial illiteracy of taxing unrealized gains. But this is actually kind of impressive. This is worse and more incoherent than I thought it would be. And then there's make rent more affordable and home ownership more attainable by giving people $25,000 to help with their down payments. So yeah, just even more economic illiteracy here. All you're doing here is you're subsidizing demand. That just immediately increases the price of the supply. It doesn't work, and this has been tried before, and we know it doesn't work. I can only guess that Kamala Harris figures that her voters don't know that it's been proven it doesn't work, and so they'll just think, oh yeah, $25,000 of free money, and vote for her anyway, not knowing that this plan just increases the cost of housing even more. Then next on, grow small business and invest in entrepreneurs. Now, as long as you only read that sentence and don't actually read what her policy proposal actually says, that sounds like a good idea. But then when we read it, it's just blatant racism. It's about giving more small business administration lending to businesses that are owned by minorities. Basically, it's just more equity stuff. It's just using the SBA to rubber stamp businesses based on the race of the person who owns the business, which again, is just blatant racism. The only good thing here is expanding the startup expense tax deduction for new businesses from $5K to $50K, which yeah, that actually is a good idea. I mean, you know, some credit where it's due. The only problem is it just doesn't come with the needed reduction in government spending for that to actually matter. If the government gives you a bigger tax deduction but then raises your taxes overall more and continues to spend even more and continues the Fed money printer machine go burr more, they're still stealing more from you overall. And then next up, our plan on taking on bad actors and bringing down costs. Here she's just regurgitating Robert Reich's propaganda that we should be blaming the increases in pricing that we see at the store on price gouging instead of inflation. This nonsense has been very roundly debunked. It's based on cherry-picking data way out of context and making outrageous arguments such as claiming that CPI and PPI measure the same sectors of the economy, which they don't. This is actually another thing I did a video on. It's just more propaganda and more deception. It's just a way to trick people into voting for a bigger, more authoritarian government with bigger pockets in the economy by blatantly lying to people about the cause of why we're seeing prices go up. And this price gouging myth has been debunked long before Kamala Harris put this up in her issues. So again, another thing that she ought to know isn't true. Then in strengthening and bringing down the cost of healthcare, well, as you could probably guess, is just more socialized medicine ideas. But it also highlights kind of the problem with socialized medicine and the take the government tends to have on it. For example, it says right here, she'll build on the Biden-Harris administration's successes in bringing down the cost of life-saving prescription drugs for Medicare beneficiaries by extending the $35 cap on insulin and $2,000 cap on out-of-pocket spending for seniors to all Americans. Okay, I mean, yes, that will reduce the costs, but at the overall economy's expense, which is weird because there's actually a much better solution than that, which comes up to the question of why not just attack the reason that insulin is so expensive in the first place. The reason insulin costs so much is actually pretty much the same reason that most drugs within the pharmaceutical industry cost so much, which is that current laws allow for blatant and insane patent abuse. The government effectively grants a very small selection of companies a monopoly on producing certain drugs and certain medical supplies. And of course, since they have a government-granted monopoly, they then jack the prices up sky high. Why not just get rid of the regulations that force that monopoly to exist? And it doesn't even have to be what Mises Caucus libertarians like myself would like, which would be abolishing patents outright. It could just be getting rid of patent evergreening or reducing the time frame of medical patents. I mean, just something. Anything that actually allows the private sector to have more market competition in the field of drugs. Even just half of that would reduce the price of insulin a lot more than just putting a government cap on it. Kamala's idea here is like trying to fix a sinking ship by rerouting the water that's coming in from the leak rather than just, fixing the leak. And I don't mean rerouting the water out of the ship, which is something they sometimes actually do have to do if a leak can't be immediately fixed. Oh no, I mean this is as dumb as rerouting the water somewhere else within the ship. And then in protecting and strengthening Social Security and Medicare, she doesn't give any real plan of how she's going to fight to ensure Americans can get the Social Security benefits they earned, and somehow blames Donald Trump for the problems with this. But then next in supporting American innovation and workers. So this is where things get a little funny, because in recent interviews she's been trying to distance herself from the Biden administration, and yet right here she's admitting that a lot of the economic policies have been her working with President Biden. And so she's praising the CHIPS and Science Act, she's praising the infrastructure law, and of course praising the Inflation Reduction Act and the American Rescue Plan, which, spoiler alert, none of that reduced inflation. It all made it worse. So this is all just more gaslighting. I could go in depth into this specific subject of Kamala's policy proposal. There's actually some pretty good articles on the Mises Institute that explain why this particular section is wrong. So if you want more information on the fraudulence of the Inflation Reduction Act or the American Rescue Plan, I'll include those both as sources in the description below, and you can take a look at it for yourself. But the TLDR of it is it doesn't actually do what it claims to do. It's trying to claim that printing lots of money is going to somehow reduce inflation. It's blatant deception. It's basically saying that we're going to fix a burning building by throwing more fire on it. It's just objectively wrong in every conceivable way that it can be wrong. But anyways, next she goes into student debt relief. $170 billion for student debt relief. The issue here is that it's basically welfare for rich kids. You took out a loan, pay it back. It really is that simple. The only problem here is that a lot of colleges were admittedly a little bit deceptive in just how much money people would earn using certain degrees. We now know that this idea that just get a degree in a degree and you'll get a job is just obviously false. There's a very big difference between getting a STEM degree, such as going for engineering, and getting an underwater genderqueer dance studies theory degree. One of those, we'll just say, is a lot more likely to get you a job. The only cases where I would consider that people shouldn't have to pay back their student loans is in certain fraudulent for-profit colleges that deliberately lied to students about what kind of education they'd be getting, because that's basically a scam. And many of those colleges have actually shut down now, and the students who attended them are left holding the bag. But of course, that's a very rare situation. That's an unusual circumstance where certain students were actually scammed. The vast majority of students who have federal student loans went to a legitimate, often state college or state university, and they should just pay it back. You took out a loan, pay it back. Unless you're one of the very few students out there, maybe less than 2%, who have a legitimate possible case that you were scammed, just pay it back. Because otherwise, again, it's just welfare for, again, upper middle class and rich kids. And of course, she's bragging about record investments into various colleges that are based on minority representation. So even more blatant racism, which is honestly kind of funny because oftentimes it's the media and a lot of lefties that are accusing Donald Trump of racism. And yet when I went over Donald Trump's policies, he had nothing as blatantly racist as this. I mean, this is Kamala Harris being racist and being proud about it. She's sitting there telling us, yeah, I redirect government funds to people based on their race, and that's somehow a good thing. No, it's not a good thing. It's actually significantly more racist than anything Donald Trump has ever done. I mean, again, I have to say, these policy proposals are even worse than I thought they would be. And then the last two parts of her economic policy agenda, investing in affordable childcare and long-term care, lower energy costs, and tackle the climate crisis, well, they're just her more doubling down on the American Rescue Plan and the Inflation Reduction Act, and pretending like those somehow reduce costs, while again, kind of treading the generic DNC line on climate crisis. Nothing really special here. But then we reach the cherry on top, the absolute best, funniest thing about Kamala Harris's policy positions, which is that in each of these sections, she includes a part of Donald Trump's Project 2025 agenda. And as someone who actually read Project 2025's book on a mandate for leadership, I can say with absolute, unwavering certainty that Kamala Harris has absolutely no idea what Project 2025 even is. Either that or she's just blatantly lying about it. Not only has she probably not read the book, I don't think anybody in her team has read the book. And if it wasn't for the fact that she's gone on record talking about the book existing, I would even suspect that she doesn't even know there is a book. There's nothing in Project 2025 about increasing prices. It's a book about slashing government bureaucracies and going into in-depth of what those government bureaucracies do. And this isn't in Trump's agenda either. And as for Social Security, Medicare, and DOE, and preschool programs, Head Start, and Affordable Care Act, etc., yes, there's some things in Trump's policies in Project 2025 about those, but they're about replacing them with other things. For instance, Project 2025, yes, they do want to dismantle the Department of Education, but they want to do so in a way that returns the public funding to state-based level as opposed to federal-based level. So it's still actually being publicly funded. So she's just blatantly lying right here. The only thing that's kind of true is that yes, Trump's tariffs are not a good idea, and that is one thing that's bad about Trump's plan. But the thing is, it's not actually part of Project 2025. In fact, what Project 2025 actually does is it almost holds an internal debate within the book and gives both sides of the arguments on pro and against tariffs, by having a section written by Lastman for free trade and a section written by Navarro for fair trade. It's like she's just saying Trump and Project 2025 and mixing them together without having any idea what Project 2025 even is. And no, there's nothing in there about raising rent. There's nothing that would cost people jobs. I mean, unless you're talking about government bureaucrats who kind of deserve to lose their jobs. It's not going to increase the debt either. In fact, Project 2025, if you actually read the book, you would know that it would probably reduce the debt even more than Trump's actual policies. So it's really funny that she's bringing up Project 2025 here. Again, just showing that she clearly has not read the book, is probably just going entirely based on what her advisors have told her about it, who have not read Mandate for Leadership either. This is just pure nonsensical fear-mongering right here. It's not just false, it's kind of comically false. And this is kind of the biggest problem I have with Kamala Harris's proposals. Her policy agenda itself is, again, as I've just explained, completely nonsensical, at least for the economy so far. But then she's combining a nonsensical and incoherent policy platform with just pure fear-mongering on what Trump's supposed agenda is, based on rumors she's heard about Project 2025, despite clearly not knowing what it really is. And in the event she has read the book and does know what it really is, then well, she's just lying about it, and that's even worse. So it seems to me that she really is just trying to win the election purely on the fear that she's not Donald Trump. And that's honestly really lame. You can't just make a policy platform that's a gish gallop of pure lies, and then top it off with fear-mongering of, I'm not the other guy, and the other guy plans to do these things, which, by the way, the other guy isn't actually planning to do these things, with the exception of the tariffs. Which again is weird because she didn't say that they're tariffs. I mean, she didn't even get it right. But anyway, I'll move on to the next section. Safeguard our fundamental freedoms. This section's honestly kind of boring because it's mostly just about abortion. Now, I will admit it's smart of her to talk about abortion because there's a lot of single-issue voters out there who have been gaslit into thinking that abortion is the most important thing. For instance, there's a lot of young women out there who think that their entire personhood depends on their right to abortion. And on the flip side, you have a lot of especially religious conservative types who are also single-issue voters against abortion. And so both these groups of people are going to be voting based on how they feel about abortion. And that's kind of silly because here's the thing. Neither Donald Trump nor Kamala Harris can actually do much about the current situation about abortion. Trump's actual policy on abortion is really just maintaining the status quo he set earlier, which returns it to state by state. And the thing is, Kamala Harris can't actually really do much about that. And if you read this carefully, you'll realize she's kind of admitting that. She isn't really saying what she will do, because the way the law currently is, it's not really something for the president to decide. So instead she says she'll never allow a national abortion ban to become law, which doesn't matter because Trump doesn't want a national abortion ban either, and then says that when Congress passes a bill to restore reproductive freedom nationwide, she'll sign it. But Congress wouldn't really be able to do that unless the courts move, which they're not going to do within her term. So if you like abortion or don't like abortion, what you should do is you should attack it on the state level based on the state that you live on. I know some people don't like that answer, but that's just how it currently is. Voting for the president of the United States based purely on abortion right now is a wasted vote. There's zero difference between what Harris and Trump are actually going to do. And then in protecting civil rights, this is again just more equity woke stuff. It's giving people more rights based on how they identify. It's blatant racism, Trump's policy, and actually Project 2025. If you actually read A Mandate for Leadership, the funny thing is Project 2025 has the best plan on civil rights here, which is abolishing the disparate impact standard, which is what would actually solve this problem. And the funny thing is, Harris doesn't mention that in her fear-mongering section of Trump's Project 2025 agenda for the civil rights area. She doesn't even identify how Project 2025 wants to abolish disparate impact, because it's something that she would probably highly disagree with, because again, she's entirely in favor of the racism caused by disparate impact standards, and yet she doesn't even mention it here. She doesn't even go after it. Again, harping on about the Supreme Court justices and Roe v. Wade, which there is some things about that in Project 2025, but not very much of that in Trump's agenda. But the interesting thing is, she's not mentioning disparate impact, which just further proves that she hasn't actually read anything about Project 2025. She has not actually read the book Mandate for Leadership. She has no idea what she's talking about here. It's just more blatant fear-mongering. Ooh, scary orange man gonna take away all your rights. Project 2025. This is just impressively stupid. If someone on her team had actually at least gone through Mandate for Leadership, you would expect them to at least mention how Project 2025 wants to dismantle the disparate impact standard against civil rights. But they don't. It's like Harris and nobody on her team has read the book on Project 2025. Just the level of incompetence and lack of effort here is off the chart. So I'll just move on to the next section, ensure safety and justice for all. This section is basically just about crime and borders. So for making our communities safer from gun violence and crime, Kamala Harris's solution is basically just gun control. Violent crime bad, therefore take people's guns away, problem solved. Except for the fact that there's pretty hard evidence that that doesn't actually work. This is actually another thing that I did an entire video on. So yet another bad idea from Harris. But another interesting thing that stands out here is her kind of bragging about how she and Biden, under their great leadership, violent crime is now supposedly at a 50-year low. Now, the problem with this is that rating violent crime and what the crime rate actually is a lot more complicated than most politicians try to make it out to be. Depending on which numbers you look at, violent crime is either up or down. For instance, if you consider facts that reporting rates seem to be down because people seem to trust the cops less these days, then there's a good chance that violent crime isn't really down. There's a pretty good and pretty recent article from Pew Research Center that explains this. A lot of what you're told by the media and various politicians about the crime rate is usually an oversimplification. For instance, it depends on which year you're looking at. Since the 1990s, yes, most of the crime rates for just about everything, violent crimes, property crimes, and victimizations, have gone down since then. However, if you look at other research, you find out that this is due to a spike in crime that happened around the 70s, and the United States was actually better off during the 50s. But in the short run, the reality is crime really isn't any better than it was during 2018 to 2019. In fact, there's pretty good data to suggest that it's worse. See, part of the problem here is that it depends on what crimes actually get reported to the FBI. So this depends on crimes being reported to the police, and then the police reporting their data to the FBI, and then we get FBI statistics from that. And so it's very hard to tell what number of crime is falling through the cracks in terms of reporting bias. One thing that suggests this could be an issue is that Americans believe that crime is up nationally, as well as up locally slightly, which could mean a few different things. Either A, people are just delusional and think that there's more crime when there isn't, or B, people are seeing more crime, it's just not really being reported to the police because people don't trust the cops as much. So things are a lot more complicated than what Harris is suggesting here, especially with this weasel argument right here, largest single year drop in murders ever. Yeah, sorry, that doesn't mean anything. Data changes in a single year mean very little when it comes to the crime rate in a 4-year term, especially when you consider the fact that COVID caused a lot of spikes in a lot of different data, from unemployment to GDP to various crimes, etc., that then immediately went away when the lockdowns ended. You have to look at crime data over time and then try to understand why that data says what it says. Regardless of this, increased gun control laws are not going to work. Increased gun control tends to reduce gun crime, but actually increases crime overall. Because when you take away people's access to guns, people just end up using the next best thing. And the reality is guns are actually a really good crime deterrent. Or to make a really long explanation short, if you ban guns, and then gun murders reduce by 50%, but then knife murders increase by 500%, well, you haven't really fixed anything there, have you? So anyway, more bad ideas from Harris. Let's just move on. Secure our borders and fix our broken immigration system. Now, this particular section is just kind of bizarre gaslighting. Harris is trying to pretend like she's for securing the border, despite the fact that the evidence suggests that no, the Biden administration did not secure the border. I guess a lot of the reasoning comes from her trying to blame Donald Trump here. Donald Trump killed the border deal for his political gain. Now, this is actually a really common propaganda talking point in favor of Harris that could potentially take up its own entire video on. If you look this up on the internet, you'll see tons and tons and tons of media articles claiming that Donald Trump killed some bipartisan border deal because he thought that securing the border would be bad for his campaign. But when you actually dig deeper, it turns out it was a little bit more complicated than that. First of all, the bill included a lot more than just securing the border. You can call a bill whatever you want. You can call it securing the border, and then the bill doesn't necessarily have to have everything to do with securing the border. It could only be maybe 10% securing the border and 90% a bunch of funding for other things. And in this case, it was actually 20-80. It seemed to be 20% securing the border and 80% funding for a bunch of other things. The main complaint I found from Republicans about the bill was that it used $20 billion for federal funding to expedite migrant processing into the US, which isn't really securing the border. Then in tackling the opioid and fentanyl crisis, this is just more government interventionism. It's been explained many times why the actual solution to this is just to end the drug war. Government involvement in this has just been a catastrophe, so I'll just move on. Next up is ensuring no one is above the law. Vice President Harris believes that no one is above the law. Now, this is actually partially good and partially bad. It's definitely true that politicians should not be above the law in terms of real property rights crimes. The problem here is that the United States legal code is so complex and includes so many laws that aren't for real crimes, that they are not for things that should be crimes. This also opens the door for a lot of lawfare, and that allows those with government power to go after their political opponents with a bunch of bogus laws that have nothing to do with property rights. You have this complex legal code where they'll say, oh hey, if you don't cross this T and dot this I during your election campaign against us, then you go to jail. And that's kind of ridiculous. That shouldn't be a thing. However, it is true that politicians should not be above the law, so I give this one a half pass. Because it's pretty obvious that Harris isn't saying this out of any real belief in the principles. She's just saying it to appeal to her voter base that wants to jail Trump, and doesn't care why Trump is being jailed. They just want him in jail because of TDS, and any quasi-legal excuse will do. And then, of course, we have Trump's Project 2025 agenda, which is just more total nonsense about Project 2025. Project 2025 does not put the FBI and the Department of Justice directly under the control of the president. In fact, it actually reduces a lot of what the FBI does to just investigating crime. Again, Project 2025 and the book Mandate for Leadership is more like a bureaucratic reform plan that involves firing a lot of middle managers and either abolishing their position or replacing it with some conservative loyalist, since they currently have the position filled by a Democrat loyalist. So what Harris is saying here is entirely hypocritical, because worst case scenario, Project 2025 just takes the job away from a D and gives it to an R. If that counts as direct control for the president, then well, she and Biden already have that direct control. Which means that Kamala Harris is effectively stating that if Donald Trump, the current Republican nominee, wins, then Republicans will have more control over the United States government. Yeah, thanks for that, Kamala. We needed you to explain that to us. Nobody in the room knew that until Kamala Harris came and told us. Oh man, this is so stupid. And then of course it includes that Trump will make us less safe in gun violence and yada yada yada. So it's just more nonsensical fear-mongering. And last up we have keeping America safe, secure, and prosperous. Now in terms of interventionist foreign policy, Republicans and Democrats don't really differ that significantly. That being said, I think it's a bit more fair to look at it from the point of who did a better job. Was it Harris and Biden, or was it Trump? Well, neither of them did a good job, but Trump was one of the very few presidents where he started no new wars under his term. So I'll give him credit for that. Whereas the Harris and Biden administration really just seems to take on the strategy of throw money at the problem and do interventionism and the problem will go away. And foreign policy, unfortunately, is a lot more complicated than that. It doesn't really work. And then, of course, she has to end it with more on Trump's Project 2025 agenda, saying Trump cozied up to dictators and turned his back on allies. Now, first off, this once again has absolutely nothing to do with Project 2025. Absolutely nothing whatsoever. It is again painfully obvious that Kamala Harris did not actually read the book Mandate for Leadership. But again, it kind of doesn't matter because it's pretty obvious that Project 2025 is more or less just being used by the DNC as a fear-mongering buzzword. Project 2025 has probably been the target of one of the most intense fear-mongering media campaigns we've seen in possibly 30 years. Maybe even longer than that. And so Harris's team is just using the word Project 2025 here as just a simple fear tactic. The DNC knows that their voter base largely trusts what the mainstream media says, and so she's just kind of relying on the mass media fear-mongering campaign for Project 2025 in hopes that it will scare voters into voting for her as a vote against Trump's fearful Project 2025 agenda, even though it's not actually his agenda. And that is just really kind of pathetic. Politicians need more than just vote for me because other guy's scary. But anyway, what's the conclusion here? Well, I think it's pretty obvious that Kamala Harris, if she wins, is just going to be another boring establishment puppet like President Biden was. Most of these policy positions are terrible, deliberately obfuscated, or just otherwise nonsensical, which suggests that she doesn't really know what she's doing. And therefore, if she wins, she's just going to rely on the same bureaucrats that ran President Biden's administration. In Biden's case, he let them run his administration for him, because unfortunately Biden is in some stage of dementia, which is not a fun illness to be going through. I'm not particularly a fan of Biden, but I know how bad dementia is, and it's a fate I don't wish on anyone, so it's unfortunate. And in Kamala Harris's case, she's going to let them run her administration because she's honestly just not that competent. And these policy proposals are really just the final proof that we need to say that, yeah, she's totally incompetent and has absolutely no idea what she's doing. Ultimately, what Kamala Harris is just another DNC authoritarian interventionalist. She believes in using the government and taxation to throw money at problems, which then increases problems, which then justifies more government and more spending. And kind of just an endless cycle until you have this slow walk towards socialism. The exact opposite of what the United States needs right now. We need someone who at least has a chance to recognize just how much corruption is going on with government bureaucratic institutions, and thus at least has a chance of reducing some of those institutions. Harris, in the end, really will just be another boring establishment puppet. She's just going to do whatever the administrative state wants her to do, which will involve more administrative state and more status quo. That's pretty much it. So yeah, thanks for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe, either for the algorithm or for the heck of it. And if you like my content and want to support me, you can do so on either Ko-Fi or Subscribestar, or by buying some merch, or again by checking out Ground News, a link of which will be in the description below. But again, thanks for watching. Till next time.